So just when you know, if, for instance, this guy, if we went with perfectly round there, you know, or not round, but oval, and having that nice and vertical, we're actually tilted off to the side for the rest of it. So you kind of like split the difference, roll it over a little bit, and then this end you can kind of modify it as you're fitting it to your guard. Or if you wanted to, you could really fit your guard, shape the end to your guard beforehand. Alright, so once I got my piece laid out here, I went through with a chisel and I just tapped in, cut a line on all my lines. So now I have a basis to work from. This is actually the first knot that I've done with chisels. Mostly I use a turbo carver and a flex shaft, and that does a really good job, but if you're doing it that way, you need to wear a respirator, and it's really hard for me to talk to people when I have a respirator on. So basically I have my lines cut in, and I'm going to go through and just take the edge of my chisel and just start cutting out my outside. Just laying a basic line. Having the line cut in already, the moose antler peels really nicely, so it's going to peel up to that line really, really well.
Is there a reason you're using the moose antler as opposed to a different kind?
Well, I've done a lot of white-tailed deer, which is also really nice. The good thing about the moose antler is it has a lot less pith. So like if you look in the center of that, it's pretty solid. There is a little bit of pith in there, but it's a dense pith. So you can get a really deep carving in here if you want. Right now I'm doing a very surface carving, right? But the reason that I'm using the moose antler is because it made a nice piece. It was a nice shape, a nice size for the handle that I wanted to make.
Where do you get the moose antler?
We get it from this guy in, I think he's in Wisconsin. He's in the Midwest. He, I forget the name of his site. I can get that for you. But he basically hires Boy Scouts to pick up antler for him out in the woods. And so a lot of these are drops. So that way you have a nice. They're much nicer to work with, especially if you're using the crown piece. You have as opposed to the cut from the skull, you have a nice kind of like button on the end that you can carve. I have a bunch of other handles that I've carved. I meant to bring those knives over here, but is Michael? Hey, Michael. Michael.
Yes.
Can you grab a couple of the antler handles that I've carved before, just to show folks?
Is that a wood carving chisel you're using?
It is a wood carving chisel. Yeah, absolutely. And
You're not hitting it hard enough to break the handle.
No, I'm really just gently tapping it. You can see it's a really small hammer. You don't need that much. You don't even need to use the hammer. You could definitely do it by hand, but by using the hammer, I get a little bit more control, and it is I can cut a little bit deeper because it's
When you say you're doing it by hand, you mean basically pushing the blade?
Yeah, just pushing. Yeah, as using the hammer as opposed to pushing, because you know, the pushing will work just fine, and I will move to the point of just of not using the hammer anymore. But right now, laying this all in, using the hammer definitely helps a lot with the control.
What kind of bevels
because
do you have on the blade? Is it one-sided or is
it's a double-sided bevel.
using a double-sided
Yep.
bevel?
Yep. So right now I'm just going through and cutting out all around. And one of the most important things about carving and getting a nice looking carving is keeping a consistent line width. Very important. And also where your line meets the rest of your handle, you want it to be a nice crisp edge, as opposed to a rounded out edge. You go through and you make that more of a like a closer to a 90 degree, or even a cutout, an undercut. One of those knives. That one there. I did a lot of undercutting on that, and you can see that the it really makes everything just stand out. So the more undercutting you can do, the more bold your knot work is going to be, or your carving in general. Something that is not quite along the lines of knot work, but the knife there with the face, really important thing to think about is the depth, like at what point you want to see the different parts of the face, or whatever image it is that you're carving. So obviously the nose is they're going to be the thing that stands out the most on the face. So you carve everything back and leave the nose out. Before even getting into sort of detail and just doing your basic carving, make sure you leave the nose out, or wherever you want to stand out the most, carve everything behind it. Yes?
When you're undercutting, isn't it easier to do with a rotary tool than with a...
It is. It's a different. I find the rotary tool can be really effective, and I do like using them. The one downfall that they have is that they have a tendency to skip. So it's easy, like if you're cutting in a line and you're really trying to cut a deep line in, sometimes you can skip out of the groove that you're cutting, and then you plaster across your piece, and then you're like, now I got to polish all that back, and sometimes change the heights of things. Well, one thing. Like I said, I've done most of my carving with a rotary tool, but for the purpose of this, I wanted to not have to wear a respirator, and plus it's kind of cool doing this with chisels anyway.
Is it possible to get that amount of detail with just chisels?
Yes, absolutely. Because you can go through and once you can actually, and you end up with a smoother surface with a chisel as well. It's really hard to get a nice smooth surface with a rotary tool because you have you're working with a ball or a rounded point, and so if you I tend to end up doing a lot of stippled backgrounds when I'm using the rotary tool, because it's really easy to just go beep, 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 and make a nice even background, which is perfectly pleasing, but it's very obviously a rotary tool. So if you're trying to do something that is more historically accurate, if you're going for something where trying to do a historically accurate carving on a sax or something to that effect, it's really easy to tell a rotary tool. The thing is, you could go and do most of your work with a rotary tool because sometimes it is faster because you can remove a lot of material really easily with a rotary tool, and then go back with a chisel to smooth things out. Because one of the other tools that I was using for this is this little graver, and it's got a flat, a little flat tip there, and that's really good for coming in and really defining a 90 degree, a really sharp edge. But the other thing that I found was coming to this flat is a nice sharp 90, and you can just come in with that and just scrape things nice and smooth. And so to get to the point where, if you had enough practice with this, I'm sure you could get to the point where you don't even really need to use much in the way of sandpaper in the end. You can just kind of scrape everything nice and flat. You can get, things like nice fine points to go in and hit little details. There are, with some of the rotary tools, with a turbo carver, it's got the little diamond bit little diamond bit ends, tips, and some of those are very, very fine. You know, you can get them from dental sites, so it's the same kind of stuff that people are using to, your dentist is using to drill on your teeth, which has to be a very small tip, right? So, but I think that you can definitely get the same kind of detail with a chisel. It's just going to be, you're going to have to use a smaller chisel. You know, the smaller the detail you want it to be.
You got. There's a dental tip called a number 35, which is actually a miniature end mill.
What is it?
It's a miniature end mill.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's a dental tool.
Yeah.
Assuming you can keep it from running somewhere, it does a really good job.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It is also a slightly different thing here with, I'm trying to make sure that the camera can see what I'm doing too. I went through, well, I laid it out with a pencil. I lightly went over it with a rotary tool just so that I could see things, because a pencil is really difficult to see on this surface. And then, and I just came over with a chisel and then went over my lines with the chisel just to cut a small spot to work to.
A shelf to cut up against.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the one difficulty is that there was much debate as to where to do this demo. This is the spot in the shop that has the best light.
Well, I think the camera helps a lot.
Yeah.
The problem is I can't hear you out there, so I have to like.
Yeah, yeah, it's the difficulty. You can see or not, and not hear, or.
Next time you have to run audio.
Yeah, yeah. We were hoping that we could get the audio on the camera to run and go through the television, but for some reason it doesn't.
Is there a grain to that?
Well, it has a little bit of a, it's definitely a fibrous material. So you do have a bit of a linear grain, but it's a really easy to, it's a very fine grain, so it's easy to cut
Pass
against.
through.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've carved ivory, which has like no grain.
Yeah.
So I have done both.
Yeah, I've never done any carving on ivory.
It's awesome. It's my all-time favorite material.
And your all-time most expensive one.
Well, I was given some scraps from an old timer who got it from an old timer, before it was a horrible thing to do.
Or before they knew it was a horrible.
Well, before they cared, I think they always knew.
Right.
But it's an amazing thing. It's like no grain. It's like working with plastic, but it's got no grain. You can after you work it, you can like rub it on your jeans and it'll polish back up. It just don't burn it. Worst smell ever. Power tools. I think burnt hair smells bad. So
I can lay out some more smell. That comes from being an NFT, so.
You gonna start collecting bottles so you can save your nickels.
The bolster on that It's really cool too. The brass, the pattern that you worked into it.
Yeah, well, this one is actually Peter did the brass and the blade. The blade on this one is Woot's.
Yeah.
And then and I carved the handle.
I'm curious about that pattern you got into the hilt there. That's cool.
The twisted
Yeah,
wire.
that he just did that with a turbo carver.
Oh, okay.
Oh, the background.
Yeah. It's a good compliment to the carving.
I'm giving all my antlers to my dog to chew. Well, they sell little pieces like that for like $20 at the pet store for a dog to chew on. So my friend's father has a farm in Ohio, and he brought me a bag full of antlers. And
Oh wow.
I've been told that once dogs are they're used to chewing on them, you just take them into the woods during
they'll find them?
season,
Oh,
they'll
yeah?
find them. And then you turn around and sell those out to other people.
There you go. So now you're making me want to carve it down.
Step 3, profit.
Exactly. Anything you can do to profit off your dogs, they're going to just take from you. Yeah.
That seems pretty soft.
It works really well.
Yeah.
It
You ever just try like a hand gravers? Can you just push this through without the?
yeah, it takes quite a bit of pressure, but you can definitely push it through, and that's kind of how once I get the majority of this roughed out, I start going in by hand. Just the one difficulty is that you always run the risk of applying too much pressure, sliding past. Finally, the material gives, and then you slide past and gouge something.
Right.
But it works really, really well. It polishes up very easily. You can see.
You need a carver's mallet.
What's that?
So you need a carver's mallet instead of that chasing.
Yeah. Again, I just this is the first thing that I've started carving with chisels.
Yeah.
But the concepts are all there.
Where did you do this one?
That one I did with a turbo carver.
What you do the inking with is just
I used leather dye,
okay,
a mahogany leather dye.
and then you take it back off the surface, or you just kind of paint it in it.
Yeah, once I went over the whole thing with the leather dye,
Okay.
and I just went back over it with with some sandpaper.
Great.
And that's the same finish that I did on this guy. Then I just went back and buffed it. So, but it's a really, I only took this to like.
So you're making a sax or something.
Yeah.
Nice. So,
Yeah, the idea was my original plan was to have the blade all done, which I have it all forged out and everything, but.
you're gonna drill that for a tang, or
Yeah.
burn it in?
Yeah, I'll drill close to size and then burn the rest of the way.
Gotcha.
I was about to say, and it'll smell amazing.
Yeah.
You'll taste it. That's the worst part.
From what I've been seeing.
Respirators. Your friends.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
So why do you use such a flat, wide chisel? It seems like, is it just because you're roughing right now, or?
Yeah, I'm trying to remove a bunch of material. And then I'll switch to the gravers and just kind of use that guy. I thought about making myself a smaller chisel, but I, like so many things, ran out of time.
Amen.
So now I'm just gonna, now that I got most of it all roughed in, I'm just gonna start taking some larger chunks down. One of the difficulties with this is that it can be easy to chip out in places. So you have to be careful when you're cutting along in one direction and then you come to a stopping point, you got to be careful that before you get there, you go in and you cut down so that your line is not going to then chip out.
That's about the grain.
So could you like go in with a graver first and do like an outline and then chip out, or like then
I think that's what he did with the
Yeah.
power
Oh,
tool.
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I missed that part. Okay.
Yeah, I went in and I went over just really lightly with
Got
the
it.
power tool, and then I came in and cut a line, not terribly deep,
Uh-huh.
but I cut a line.